This evening I'm going to talk about Isaac McCoy, Apostle of the Western Trail. Isaac McCoy was born in 1784 and died in 1846. Now, if you go all the way through Oklahoma and Nebraska and Arkansas and Kansas, and you speak to people about their history, the surprising thing is that they know all about Jesse James, and they know all about Belle Starr, and they know all about Zip Wyatt and heroes, so-called, such as them. But they do not know about a man who played a far more important role in the history of those areas, Isaac McCoy. And I've been wondering why. And I think the answer is that people are so fascinated with the stories of buried treasure and robberies and violence that these people perpetuated. And if you look into the bookshops throughout that area, especially in Oklahoma and northern Texas, you find books on treasure stories about buried treasure in those areas. But they have forgotten that there was a man there, Isaac McCoy, who brought them treasures untold, treasures that moth and rust cannot corrupt, because Isaac McCoy brought those people in those areas the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ. And he was the man who mapped out those areas. He traveled throughout Oklahoma, throughout Nebraska and Kansas, and put all those places on the map. And he did more. He saw the writing on the wall for the American Indians and gathered the Indians from all over the states and brought them safely down to the so-called Indian Territory, where they could live in safety and rule themselves. But the story of Isaac McCoy is a forgotten story, and this caused me to start studying his life, looking into documents, telling about him, going through all his letters, which are extant, some thousands of these letters, and gradually piecing together the history of this man who is one of America's greatest heroes. Now, the American side of the McCoy family, to tell you about that, we must go back to the year 1700. And there was a small boy in Scotland called James McCoy. He was 10 years of age. James McCoy was an orphan, and he had an employer who was a very, very brutal man, and he had to work hard, although he was only 10 years of age. And so little James McCoy decided to run away from Scotland, where he lived, to get on a boat to Baltimore and to start a new life in America. Now, you can hardly imagine today a boy younger than Jonathan running away from home and going all over the seas, hiding as a stowaway on a boat, getting discovered and becoming a cabin boy and working his way for those long weeks across the waters. But James McCoy prospered. He married a woman who was of the Bruce family, and those of you who know Scottish history will know when the McCoys and when the Bruces get together, anything can happen. They're very, very industrious people. And so James McCoy founded a town, founded a large fort, and the McCoys settled down in Pennsylvania, which was being freed, as the historians put it, from the Indians in those days. Now, James McCoy had a son called William. He was the third son of 6 children, and William McCoy became a pioneer Baptist pastor. They settled down on the Ohio River in Jefferson County near Louisville, and William became the pastor of a church called Buck Creek Church. And then he founded a church in Indiana called 14 Mile Creek, and this church was the very first Protestant church ever to be established in Indiana. So we notice that grandfather and father had a real pioneer spirit. So it was no wonder that Isaac McCoy inherited that same sturdy spirit. Now, in 1803, there were 19 states in America. Most of them were on the eastern side, and west in those days, well, they spoke of Carolina being west, North and South Carolina. Now they're east, but in those days, the whole area westwards of the Carolinas had not been surveyed. Nobody had travelled there because it belonged to the French. And in 1803, Napoleon sold the so-called Louisiana Purchase to America for $12 million, and it was larger than the whole of the 19 states put together. And very early, it became Isaac McCoy's plan to give this area, this great area, to the Indians, so that they would be safe from the terrible things that were happening to them at the hands of the whites. Now, Isaac McCoy was born then in 1784, and he grew up at Buck Creek Church, where his father was a pastor, and George Waller, a man who ordained him later to the ministry, was an elder. Now, in 1803 too, Isaac McCoy met his wife-to-be called Christiana, who was only 16 years of age, and they married, and we can really say lived happily ever after. Now, I must tell you a little about Christiana. She was called Polka, and they probably came from Poland or from that area regionally. And Christiana's father was a captain in the army. He'd also fought in the Civil War. And in those days, of course, America was permanently at war with the Indians, so the Indians were governed through the War Department and not the Department for Internal Affairs. And Captain Polka took his family, it consisted then of 3 children and his wife, and placed them in a fort in Kentucky so that they would be safe. And so he went off to fight the Indians. But the Indians were rather more cunning than he thought they were. They had hidden and waited until the male forces, the cavalry and the soldiers, had left the fort, and they stormed the fort, and they took all the women and children in the fort captive, including Christiana and her mother and a brother and a sister. And the Indians, who were the Ottawas, took them all the way from Kentucky right up to Detroit, where they kept them as slaves. On the way up, they went through terrible difficulties and were bound, but they had to walk all the way up to Detroit. Christiana's mother gave birth to a little boy called Charles. And then, when Captain Polka came back and found that his family had gone, He didn't know whether they were alive or dead, and spent the next several years looking for them, journeying on horseback all through America. And finally he found them in Detroit, captive there, and the Indians would not give them up, and so he had to sell all his property, his farmlands, everything he had, to buy his own family back. Well, you might think because of that Christiana would hate the Indians. Oh no, when she became a Christian, she dedicated her life to the Indian mission. But Christiana seemingly never went to school and hardly ever learned to read or write properly, and I have a number of her letters, and you would think they were written by a 3 or 4 year old. She starts in the bottom left-hand corner and in a very scrawly writing with almost every word spelt incorrectly, works her way up to the top right-hand corner, and it is very difficult to read. But those copies of those letters are very precious to me because I know the background. Now, in 1807, Isaac McCoy believed he was called to the ministry, and he was put on a year's probation, and he was asked to prove that he was worthy of becoming a minister. So he bought a small farm, worked as a wheelwright, making wagon wheels, and as a farmer, and in his spare time he journeyed through Kentucky, Illinois, and Indiana preaching the gospel. He would cover 400 miles each month on horseback. And though he was only on probation, he managed to found 5 different churches and 3 missionary societies. At least, probably he did much more, but those are the only ones we know about. So a most industrious person. And finally, in 1810, he was ordained by his father and George Waller into the Christian ministry and set up his church at Maria Creek, which was composed of the people who had been converted under his ministry. Now immediately Maria Creek drew up a declaration of faith, and this declaration of faith, which actually was drawn up in 1809, before even McCoy became a pastor, it is founded securely on the doctrines of grace. And this church eventually became part of the Southern Baptist system, and the Southern Baptists nowadays, through a man called Jeff Poole, who wrote a book against returning to Egypt, are complaining that the early creeds of the Southern Baptists were forced upon them by people such as Boyce and Dagg in the 1850s, and that they didn't represent the faith of the believers in those days. Well, if you read the Maria Creek Creed of 1809, you will find that that wasn't the case at all. Particular Baptist Publishing have published this creed recently, and it's in one of their books, but I've forgotten now which it is. I think it's the one, short biographies of Isaac McCoy, and one being by a man called Ruscio. But we can check that later. Now, the McCoys spent several years in the pastorate until McCoy realized they must go into full-time service with the Indians. So his association put him on probation for a year and told him that if he worked well and if he did well amongst the Indians, then he would become the association's missionary. But remember, at this time, 1812, It was America declared war on Britain. Why? Nobody seems to know, because the British were miles away by that time across the water, although there were a few trading with the Louisiana Purchase to the French, so we'd better keep the British out. But there was another reason. The government said that the Indians were all British allies, which was not true at all. So they found, through the Declaration of War of 1812, a wonderful way of getting rid of the Indians. So war was declared on the British and the Indians at one and the same time. And Isaac McCoy, who loved the Indians, was given a rifle, and he took part in such battles as the Battle of Tippecanoe, fighting against Tecumseh, the great Shawnee warrior, and his brother, the prophet McCoy, was leaning on his rifle rather than using it, thinking how he could teach them about the ways of the Lord. And his wartime years convinced him that he had to go out and become a full-time missionary. Now, soon Isaac McCoy received a great amount of opposition from his own churches and from the politicians. There were people there called Parkerites, followers of Daniel Parker. There were the New Lighters, who had split off from the Presbyterians, and there were the Campbellites, who had also split off from the Presbyterians and become a kind of pseudo-Baptist. And they all said to Isaac McCoy, no, the Indians are a dying race. You should not go to them. Just let them perish. That's the best thing that can happen to them. And it is wrong to found missions. It is not God's will. It is not the way to spread the gospel. So Maria Creek was shut out of the Baptist Association because they believed in evangelizing the Indians. Now, Elizabeth Hayward, a descendant of Isaac McCoy, writes of those anti-Indian days. And she says, most pioneers looked upon Indians as somewhat less than human, putting them in the same category as panthers, polecats, and other varmints, of which the land needed to be cleared. They were hated, feared, and despised. Isaac McCoy, who practiced the gospel of Christian brotherhood, which he preached, saw them in quite a different light. Now, people began to realize they couldn't move Isaac McCoy, so they started working on Christiana, telling her that she would soon die a widow, that the Indians would kill her husband, and that she should persuade her husband not to become a missionary. But of course she was just as keen as Isaac McCoy, so it was no use talking to her either. And so Isaac McCoy composed a very long poem in dialogue form, and he laid down all the arguments for and all the arguments against going out to be a missionary. And part of this dialogue in verse is the following. I'm travelling through the world, he said, to instruct the savage mind, to teach the poor to earn their bread, the wealthy to be kind, to show the blind the living way, to set the wanderer right, to make the sportive quit their play, the wicked to do right, to beat the swords to pruning hooks, that bloody wars may cease, to fill the world with holy books, Jerusalem with peace, to liberate the abject slave, to give the gasping breath, to disappoint the boasting grave, and starve voracious death. Now, in the period 1814-1817, the Baptists of all the states were putting their ideas and thoughts together and gradually founding the American Baptist Board of Foreign Missions. Now, you all know that Adoniram Judson and Luther Rice were two of the first missionaries who joined the board. Both those men were really Presbyterians when they went to the mission field and became Baptists later. But Isaac McCoy was already a Baptist, already used to preaching the gospel, already used to founding churches, a much more experienced man than those two. But you read your history books of Baptist missions, and Isaac McCoy is not mentioned. But those two others are given great honours. Well, Luther Rice not so much, but Judson especially. Now, Isaac McCoy appealed to the board to make him one of their very first missionaries, and they accepted him on a year's probation. And so he went to a place on the Wabash called Raccoon Creek, and he set up a school and a mission station. Now, the Baptist board had said, yes, you will be our missionary, we shall support you. And truly he became their missionary, and truly they did not support him. They just forgot him. But they heard all the great reports of what Isaac McCoy was doing, because he sent them faithfully reports of his work. And they put in all the Baptist magazines, especially the American Baptist magazine, what great pains and hardships Isaac McCoy and his wife were going through. And then they wrote, "And should we have the happiness to see the fruit of his labours, it will be his joy to say, not unto us, but unto thy name, O Lord, be all the glory." Well, never was a truer word spoken, because the glory was all to the Lord, because the Baptist board just did nothing to help McCoy. And McCoy had sold up his farm, put all the money into the mission, and he was getting greatly neglected. When McCoy, however, became famous nationally, the board gave him a little money, but it was not enough money to live on and not enough money to die on. So McCoy turned to the government. He said the government is promising to give missionaries sums of money for the Christian improvement of the Indians and for their education. So he applied for money and he got it. But McCoy didn't realize yet what kind of people the Baptist board were, so he had the government pay over the money to the Baptist board. Now, the Baptist board did not automatically give that money to Isaac McCoy, but they invested it into harebrained schemes, all of which really turned out to be nothing, and they went bankrupt. Now, Isaac McCoy began to lobby Congress to give him the Indian territories. Now, you can imagine this man from the backwoods, nobody knew him at first, going to Congress and saying, "I, Isaac McCoy, demand the whole of the Indian territory, much greater than the Union itself, for the Indians." He says, "I have seen the writing on the wall. The Indians have no future. You are just massacring them, killing them, wiping them off the face of the earth. I want to set up an Eden for them, a Canaan in the Indian territory." And Congress, this is a miracle of grace, began to take him seriously and gave him huge sums of money for his project. But naive McCoy still handed those monies over to the Baptist board. Now, we'll just look at some of the firsts of Isaac McCoy. Now, Americans like to talk about firsts, I know, so I put this specially in for you. First thing, he was a pioneer of the anti-racist movement. He founded the first couple of churches in Oklahoma, Baptist churches. In 1832, he founded the the Three Forks Church near Fort Gibson. And how did he compose that church? Well, he put an Indian pastor into that church, a Creek Indian, John Davis. A third of the church members were Indians. A third of the church members were Afro-Americans, and a third of the church members were whites. These people lived and worshipped in harmony. There was no racism at all in those churches. And of course nowadays you hear of the terrible racism in the South and how the North were all for the Indians and the Negroes. That wasn't quite the case at all. So he was an anti-racist. He joined an organization to educate Africans and allow them to go back to Africa. And one of his best pupils was one of those Africans who he trained to go back to Africa. Another first, Isaac McCoy founded a number of great American towns, and I've been to these towns and people don't know about him. He founded Kansas City. He founded Westport on the other side of the river. His son-in-law was the first Lord Mayor of Kansas City, Johnston Likens, who taught in his school. And Niles was founded by Isaac McCoy. Niles was called Carey, after William Carey, and Kansas City was called Thomas, after Dr. Thomas, who went out as a missionary to India with Carey. And I do wish that America would recognize this work of McCoy, where he was a first. First, he gave the first detailed information on the flora, fauna, and geology of the territory west of the Mississippi. He wrote very, very detailed reports on all he saw, and he made sure that the government got them, and that scientists and botanists and zoologists got to know about the fauna and flora and the geology in the Indian Territory. You see, in 1806, Meriwether Lewis and William Clark, and in 1820, Stephen Long had financed at great expense large expeditions to these territories. But they just ploughed through, not looking either to the left or the right, and said the place is barren, the place is a wilderness, the place is uninhabitable. And so the government just forgot all about the Indian Territory. But McCoy travelled backwards and forwards on foot and on horseback, drawing maps, recording everything he found, and he found it a very a country rich in flora and fauna, and even metallic ores. There was lead, there was silver, and there was cyanide there too. The first mines there were cyanide mines. Right, another thing is that he gives us the first detailed account of Indian religions, traditions, and ceremonies. If it were not for Isaac McCoy, we would have little knowledge of how the Indians lived in those days, because most research has been done in modern times when you can only guess at what those people used to be believing. Another factor is that he refused to use violence. The mentality in those days was you have to whip an Indian to get him to do anything. And McCoy refused to do this. And this caused him difficulty with one missionary called Slater up in Grand Rapids. Slater wrote a complaining letter to Isaac McCoy. He said, "Isaac McCoy, you are making my life miserable. You are spoiling the Indians." So Isaac McCoy said, "Why do you say that?" He said, "When you come to the school and teach, you do not whip the Indian boys. And you teach, and they listen to every word, and they idolize you. Now, this is a wrong way to behave with Indians. You're not there to make yourself popular. You're there to whip discipline into these savages. When I go into a classroom, I give the boys a thorough whipping. But they are so ignorant and so stubborn, they never learn a thing." And this was Slater, and I've got dozens of these letters wailing because he's a total failure, but giving all the blame to Isaac McCoy. Again, the Mormons believed that the Indian Territory was their promised land. You associate the Mormons with Utah, but Utah was their second guess as to where God wanted them. They believed that they were to have the Indian Territory, and they settled all along the coast of the Indian Territory, and they were heavily armed, and they were ready to go in and to occupy the land. Now, Isaac McCoy faced them without a weapon, and he told them that this land was a promised land, but for the Indians and not for the Mormons. And he was able to persuade them to go. Now, if you read Mormon history, they'll tell you about this evil man, Isaac McCoy, who was armed to the teeth. He was armed to the eyebrows and brutally drove off these peaceful pacifists, the Mormons. And the story is just stood on its head. But then a great tragedy. I'll tell you the whole story because there's a very brave background to it. The couple, Isaac and Christiana, decided to go up the River Wabash and go to Fort Wayne and found a mission station there. It was an old fort which had been used for the French had used it, the English had used it, and the Americans had used it against the Indians. And there they set up a large school. Now, Christiana was expecting another child. She had 14 children. She lost 11 of them in childhood because of the hunger and hardships they had to endure. And only one of those children outlived his parents, who died in their early 60s, and that was John Calvin McCoy, who became the first Lord Mayor of Westport. Now, Christiana was very ill, a threatened miscarriage. She was 8 months on, and she had all sorts of other complaints, and she needed urgently to get to a doctor. Where was the nearest doctor? 300 miles down the river. Now, Isaac had about 50 children, Indian children, to look after, so he couldn't go with his wife to the doctors, and there was no other woman there who could look after Christiana's tiny children, so Christiana had to pack 3 of her children into a canoe, and in great pain, bent double, she had to paddle all those 300 miles down a very, very dangerous river. At nights they camped on shore, but Christiana could get no sleep because she had to wave over her sleeping children to protect them from the mosquitoes. After 9 days paddling, this rather moves me. After 9 days paddling, she eventually got to Vincennes on the Wabash, 300 miles down the river, and she was able to get to a doctor who could help her, and a few weeks later her child was born, Eleanor. Now she had to make the long journey back, this time with 4 tiny tots clinging to her and not 3. Well, and this comes back to my my first, that McCoy refused to use violence. One day McCoy came back from preaching to the Indians, and his little daughter was 8 years of age, and he was looking forward to seeing her. And then suddenly he saw somebody coming towards him carrying a little dying child. It was Eleanor. An Indian had tried to murder her and left her for dead, and she did soon die. Well, everybody said to Isaac McCoy, you'll have to go and shoot that Indian. Kill him. He's vermin. Isaac McCoy said, no. He is a creation of God, and I've come to serve the Indians, not to damn them. Now, the Indian challenged McCoy to a fight. That's why he'd killed his daughter. He wanted to get McCoy to fight him so that he could kill McCoy in a fair battle. And McCoy refused. So all the Indians said, but now you're a dead man, McCoy. This Indian has now, according to our laws, every right to kill you. And so this Indian got quite drunk to give himself courage for the deed, and started boasting to his fellow Indians how he was going to cut McCoy into pieces. And one of his fellow drunks thought he knew better and how to kill a white, and they got quarrelling, and this other man killed Eleanor's murderer. So he was, by God's grace, out of the way. Now, McCoy drew up a lot of family rules, 12 in all, showing that he was not, as the superintendent, going to stand higher than anyone else, and that he would share all his goods with everybody else on the mission field, and they were to share their goods with him. So they drew up these Indian missions family rules to show how they cherished a spirit of kindness and forbearance with each other, and nobody was to think himself better than the other. And then, after they'd drawn up their rules, they decided that Fort Wayne, the church there, it was a Potawatomi church, Potawatomi, an Indian tribe, they should draw up a declaration of faith. But before they did that, they had a number of converts, and they had a great service there in the fort with the walls all around them, baptizing the new converts, and McCoy wrote a special hymn for the occasion. And I believe that before I go on, Michael will lead us in singing that hymn.
Some of the words to this hymn might seem a little strange, but you'll explain that. I think after. Did you get a copy of it?
Good job.
Oh, thank you, John. The tidings so the angels sung, until the heavens with gladness rung. The tidings late my soul replied, for me my Lord was crucified. The news shall spread through all the earth, So sang the host at Jesus' birth. Ye gentle waves, I call on you to say, is not this promise true? This very stream was lately stained with blood from strangling soldiers drained. Now strange to tell, the Prince of Peace in it displays his sovereign grace. The oaks which shook while cannons roared, now bow your heads and praise the Lord. Tell the wild man beneath your shade why Christ in Jordan's stream was laid. Those warlike towers on yonder wall, like those of Jericho, must fall, while dreadful weapons dormant lie. Shout, saints, the ark is passing by. Ye winds which spread the news of death, no longer breathe offensive breath, but the glad tidings loud proclaim. Hear, saints, rejoice in Zion's name. Sure, all who hear will join and sing. Glory to God, our Christ is King. Still let the gospel spread abroad, till all the earth shall worship God. Still let the gospel spread abroad, till all the earth shall worship God.
Oh, thank you very much, Michael. The reference to the waves and the stream, that's the Wabash River, and I think the river that joins it is the Maumee River. And the walls, of course, the walls of the fort. And why Christ in Jordan's stream was laid, of course, this is Christ's baptism. This was sung at a baptism service. And the ark, well, you remember that the ark is a symbol of the presence of the Lord and the Spirit once a year covering the broken law tablets. In other words, the Spirit covering our sins. Now, the Fort Wayne Declaration of Faith, which was drawn up in 1822, is again a wonderful declaration of the doctrines of grace. Interesting for modern lovers of those doctrines are especially Articles 5 and 10. Article 5 says, "We believe that as there is nothing new with God," in other words, God never changes, "it is His eternal purpose to save those who ultimately will be received into heaven, not upon the supposition of any condition to be performed by them, but wholly in consequence of what Jesus Christ has done in their behalf." Here we have simple missionaries, hardly ever went to school, but they know these deep theological truths that professors of theology nowadays seem to have forgotten. Article 6, "We believe the Son of God united himself to humanity, and in that state fulfilled in his life the law of God, which was binding on man, and suffered in his death the penal requisitions of the same." 7. "We believe, agreeably to the inevitable consequence of Articles 1st, 3rd, and 5th, that Christ's life, death, resurrection, and intercession were and are in behalf of those, and those only, who shall enjoy the benefits thereof. There's nobody in hell for whom Christ died. 8. We believe that regeneration is effected by the operations of the Spirit of God only and is an essential preparation for the enjoyment of God in heaven and an assurance of title thereto. 9. We believe that through grace all who are regenerated will be preserved in a gracious state and will certainly go to heaven. 10. Excuse me. We believe it to be perfectly congenial to the Scriptures and to the spirit of the foregoing articles for ministers of the gospel to command all men indiscriminately to repent and to exhort them to believe the gospel. Modern critics say these first Baptists could not have been Calvinists because they believed in preaching repentance and faith wherever they went. Well, this shows that idea to be a lie. Here we have the doctrines of grace, and here we have a missionary commission to go into all the world and preach the gospel. Now, this was signed by a man called Cobley Martin, apart from the McCoys and the Indians. Now, Cobley Martin was a teacher at the school, and he wasn't a Christian at all. And McCoy had gone to great risks in appointing him, but he couldn't get anyone else. Now, Isaac McCoy became so seriously ill that even Christiana had committed him to the Lord, and she told her husband she knew he would die. And this was too much for Cobley Martin, who, pagan as he was, got down on his knees at Isaac McCoy's bedside and began to pray earnestly that God would heal him. And he prayed and he prayed and he prayed until he prayed himself up into heaven, and the Lord mightily converted him on the spot, on his knees, at Isaac McCoy's bedside. And Isaac McCoy became well and was to serve the Lord for a good many years to come. Now, Isaac had been lobbying Congress all the time. He had been working under enormous difficulties. The board by this time had got themselves into terrible debt with their speculations and investing the government money, which ought to have gone to the Indians. And the Congress now appointed McCoy to go down to the Indian Territory and map it out and prepare for the colonization by the Indians. He was to take 22 tribes down with him. Now, the Indian Territory was now officially given to the Indians with land patents, so the Indians were the official owners, and their land patents were, or patents, do you call them in American? Patents or patents? Patents, right. The land patents were given them as long as grass shall grow and water shall run. In other words, forever. Now, this is the Indian Territory given to the Indians to own in 1836. This is McCoy's description. The country which we denominate the Indian Territory is bounded as follows: beginning at the source of a small river called Punka, after a small tribe of Indians of that name, and running down the same eastwardly to Missouri River, thence down Missouri River still eastwardly about 150 miles, thence down Missouri southwardly about 200 miles to the western line of the state of Missouri, thence south along said western line to the northwest corner of the state of Arkansas, thence southwardly on the western line of Arkansas about 78 miles to Arkansas River, thence south on the line of Arkansas to Red River, thence up Red River westwardly to a meridian 200 miles west, and thence northwardly to the beginning, the whole about equal to a tract of 600 miles long and 200 miles wide. That was the initial parcel given to the Indians. It was to be extended. And then McCoy, happy to have this success, petitioned the government to allow the Indians to set up their own parliament with delegates from them meeting together and then going once or twice a year to Congress and meeting there and receiving the same wages from the government as the white congressmen themselves. And all this was passed, and McCoy began to take the Indians down to what is now Oklahoma. The Roman Catholic Church were wanting all these monies that were provided for the Indians. And in 1821, I forgot to mention this, at the Treaty of Chicago, they put in a bid to get the government monies and take charge of what they called Indian improvement. And here was the great Roman Catholic Church with all its finance and all its power. And here was McCoy, and the board were not for him. They were against the movement of the Indians. And here was McCoy only on his own, supported by his wife. And the government gave McCoy the right to organize the treaty and organize Indian improvement. So you can imagine what a man, what a personality he was. Now the missionaries sold up in Michigan and their other areas. For Carey alone, they got $5,500. But they gave all this money to the board, and the board said, now you go down to the Indian Territory and we'll finance everything there. So Johnston Likens, who was now Isaac's son-in-law, formerly one of his teachers, he went down first and set up Shawnee near Kansas City, and he built a mission station for that cost $1,500. And so he sent to the board for them to pay off that debt. Now, the board had got hundreds of thousands of dollars by this time from the Indian mission and from the government, and they refused to pay him a penny. So he had to sell up again his own property. He had inherited a farm and some property, and pay for everything out of his own pocket. Another tragic thing happened. With the money that they were getting from the government, the Baptist Board built a gigantic college which cost millions, literally millions, in Washington, and they called it Columbian College. And McCoy thought, well, this will be just the place to send my Indian graduates. He had 8 Indians who wanted to become doctors, and they had medicine at Columbian College. So he sent the 8 Indians to the college. Well, actually, he took them. And when he got to the college, the board shut the doors on his face. And they said, we do not want Indians in this college. It is a whites-only college. McCoy said, but the Indians have financed your college. Your college has been built with money for Indian improvement. And they said, no Indians here. The students would revolt. So the Indians went and chatted with the students, and the students said, "Oh no, you're our brethren in Christ." These were all believing, baptized students, the Indians. "You're our brethren in Christ. And if you have no money, we'll make a collection amongst all the students and their parents, and we'll make sure that we can help you with your finances." And so the Baptist board, as very often, they just lied. And they broke all their commitments to McCoy and his mission. And so finally, McCoy had too much. He wrote to the mission board and accused them of deceit, of fraud, of swindle, and he gave them a piece of his mind, and he provided them, though, with positive suggestions how they could get rid of all their debts and how they could continue to work as a Christian organization. So what did the board do? They didn't tell McCoy anything. They just published in the local press and in the Christian press that Isaac McCoy was not a missionary of their board and hadn't been one for over 10 years. And they said Johnston Likens was not a missionary of their board either. And so they just dismissed their very best missionaries. Now, the people in the South, especially in Kentucky, this was too much for them. And they said, right, we are not going to finance the American Board of Foreign Missions at all. And now we see the development of the Southern Baptist Convention. They said McCoy should found his own mission. And McCoy said, yes, but we will not have a para-church body governing us. All the missionaries who are to be sent out will be sent out by their churches and financed by their churches. And this was put into practice and worked marvelously. And soon all the mission stations that had belonged to the Northern Baptist Board became the property of what McCoy called the American Indian Mission Association. Now, they had a great deal of new recruits, great men of God, who did great work on the mission field. And soon the board received a trustee amongst them called John Mason Peck, who had worked amongst the Indians himself, but had given up because the board had not supported him, just like Isaac McCoy. But now he was on the board himself, and he saw that all the schools and the mission stations were transferred to Isaac McCoy. Isaac McCoy had in his schools more Indian pupils than all the other denominations put together, including the Presbyterians, including the Roman Catholics. So you can imagine how successful his work was. And then in 1845, the Southern Baptists came together, separated from the Northern Board, who they thought were a pack of rogues, and they founded the Southern Baptist Convention, and the AIMA, McCoys mission, were founding members. And also when they set up in 1858 the Southern Baptist Seminary, the AIMA were founding members, and they were represented strongly by the Indians and also by the Africans. When you think that when the Southern Baptist Convention was founded, a third were Africans of the Christians, almost another third were Indians, and the rest were whites. And nowadays, when you go to Southern Baptist churches, you hardly see an Indian, you hardly see an African, and they were the majority. The whites were in the minority at the founding of the Southern Baptist Convention. Well, Isaac McCoy was now a very, very marked man. I don't mean marked, notorious, but marked in his body. He, through all his escapades, fording icy rivers, being in coaches that had turned over, and getting his legs trapped and things like this. He had a crushed chest, a twisted spine, a dislocated thigh joint, and he could not walk. He could not walk upright, but he was a real cripple and always in great pain. And when he was 63 years of age, he was preaching the gospel not far from home when he caught a chill, and within a few days he died at 63. Now, he was buried in Louisville's Western Cemetery in Kentucky, but nobody knows where, because that cemetery is now asphalted over, and there is no marker to show that Isaac McCoy, this great man, was buried there. But we have a record of what was on his gravestone. The following words were engraved thereon. Reverend Isaac McCoy, for near 30 years his entire time and energies were devoted to the civil and religious improvement of the Aboriginal tribes of this country. He projected and founded the plan of their colonization, their only hope, and the imperishable monument of his wisdom and benevolence. Then there was the verse, the Indian's friend, for them he toiled through life. For them in death he breathed his final prayer. Now from his toil he rests, the care, the strife. He waits in heaven, his work to follow there. McCoy's last words were, tell the brethren to never let the Indian mission decline. Now, there is no memorial to the memory of Isaac McCoy, but there is a fitting memorial to his wife, Christiana. When McCoy was up in Niles, he was going east from Niles and found a beautiful, placid stream, a very clear, fresh stream, bubbling along happily. And he said to his son, who was 10 years of age at the time, John Calvin, this stream reminds me of your mother. So I'm going to call it Christiana River. And now if you go up there, as I was just a week ago, to Michigan, you find Christiana Creek and Christiana River and Christiana Lake. And those natural monuments are there forever to remind us of the McCoys. Now, McCoy, to me, was one of the very greatest of American heroes and one of the finest missionaries of all time. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you. For Isaac McCoy. Thank you, George.
I did that too.
I never ever heard of him before.
Mm. This is the sad tale. Jesus said prophets are not honourable in their own countries. So that book over there, where is it? Perhaps there's a way. It's the only detailed study of his life ever written. And I was hoping the Americans would get down to it someday. They didn't, so I thought they'd better get a German citizen to do it. And so I did it. And I'm very grateful to God that He gave me the opportunity, because I've been really blessed. It moves me. That's why I'm near to tears so often, because I've been living with these people now for 6 years. It took me 2 years to write the book, but I've been waiting 4 years for it to be published. And it's been a long time, but now the book is out. Any questions on on this story.
You wrote the information from diaries?
Yes, from Isaac McCoy's journal and annual reports, and from his correspondence to and from the board, to and from his family, and to and from Congress and the House of Representatives, and people like that. He was invited several times to speak to the House of Representatives.
So the annual registry of Indian affairs was his journal of what he was doing?
Yes, well, it wasn't the journal itself, but it was an annual report that he made about what the work, how the work was going on. That was his personal report. And then he wrote lots of articles for the American Baptist magazine, so I got hold of those. Excuse me. And then I got hold of a great many laws and edicts and bills from government sources. The Kansas City Library helped me a great deal. Excuse me. And then I told the church, Emmanuel Baptist Church, about the... Oh, thank you very much. I told them about the archives, which had thousands of McCoy's letters on microfilm. And the church kindly bought these films and put them at my disposal. I have a large... all the NATO troops were moving out of Germany, so I got a very large reader printer of microfilm for $150, and they cost about $7,000 normally. And so I could read and print out these articles. They were all very, very tiny, so I got hold of second-hand a number of lenses so that I could blow them up 10 times, 20 times, 50 times, 100 times. Then I could encipher them or decipher them. And then I studied many books on the history of the Indians, and here and there was a little mention of Isaac McCoy, but never very much. Anything else?
Was he inspired somewhat by David Brainerd, perhaps?
Well, he knew of Brainerd and John Eliot, and he had close connections with the Stockbridge Indians in New York, who had heard the gospel through Brainerd, and eventually they came over and joined him. And they proved to be some of his most faithful friends.
So what John Calvin, what happened to him, John Calvin?
Oh, he became quite famous, but mostly politically, although he remained a fine Christian. When Isaac died, he took his mother in, and she lived another 3 or 4 years, and then she died. And he mapped out Westport and became its first Lord Mayor, and he became a trader on the Santa Fe Trail. He also discovered all the old routes going over to Mexico and California. But he became a tradesman. Johnston Likens became a doctor and a teacher, and he founded a trade school, and it's still standing actually. But I think there are mostly Negroes there now and not Indians. But the the Three Forks Church is still standing in Muskogee in Oklahoma. And some people have told me that the Three Forks Church, that was the second church founded, is still there, but I haven't had that confirmed.
So, did you find any living relatives or descendants?
Oh well, there are quite a lot, but it's very difficult to tell if they really are or not.
Yeah.
They have written histories, especially of Christiana. There are more relatives of Christiana, but you see, if a relative is a Mormon, they'll prove that Isaac McCoy was really a Mormon, and if they're a Freemason, I've just had an account of Christiana written by a Freemason. If they're Freemasons, then they were all Freemasons, and they only collect little sentences from a work here and there, string them all together, and call that a history, and they're most unreliable. Most of the accounts of Christiana are unreliable. Nobody knows really when she was born. She could have been 16 when she married McCoy, but she could have been up to 7 years older. Nobody really knows. Nobody really knows when McCoy was born, but it was around 1784. Those people who grew up in the wilderness, and they couldn't just go to an office round the corner and register a birth. It perhaps was 5 years before they registered a birth, and then they had no idea when they were born. And perhaps one parent was dead or two parents, and they were hard times.
Because the reorganized Church of Latter-day Saints, their headquarters is around Kansas City.
Yes, well, they tried to get in through there, through Shawnee. They used to go and visit people in the middle of the night and sort of try to talk, old ladies mostly, try to talk them into selling their land patent and things like that. So I've mentioned this in the book, and there's a letter from one of Isaac McCoy's daughters telling them about Joseph Smith, and she said he was an illiterate, ignorant man, and couldn't understand how he could lead these people.
Well, they were always fighting with the Masons because they stole so much of their beliefs from the Masons.
Yes.
Masons were angry with them.
Oh yes, there's a great affinity between Masons and Mormons. Yes, so I hope through this book Americans will look into Isaac McCoy's life and produce better works and deeper works, and really give him credit for what he did.
I don't know how to go about this, but the public broadcasting system, PBS, they're always doing things about Native peoples and history. It'd be a neat thing if there's some way to present them with an idea to do a story. I know it wouldn't be a Christian thing per se, but it would start to be a very interesting documentary to do.
Yes. Well, all his appearances before Congress and the House of Representatives, and all these bills that were passed at his initiative, because he worded them and planned them all. He just sent them to the government, and the government thought, "Oh, this is great. Yes, put their stamp on it." And the Department of War relied greatly on Isaac McCoy, because he was keeping the Indians peaceful too. I mean, they had ulterior motives. And politically, you could write a great story about McCoy. But he was a man of God, and I tried to show this. But I think it could be filmed too, a documentary film.
Oh yeah. Maybe the Southern Baptists fund something like that.
Yes, but it will never get to that in the hands of the particular Baptist publishing.
Yeah, their doctrinal statement or whatever, is that part of that in your book then?
Yes. I put all the Fort Wayne Declaration.
Okay.
I haven't put all the what's it called now, Maria Creek, because that's fairly generally known. So I mean, no point in sort of adding all that. But the Fort Wayne Declaration of Faith is not known.
And that's what you read part of?
Yes,
that
was Fort Wayne.
Wonderful.
But I've got the Maria Creek. If you look at that, are Southern Baptist Declarations of Faith still valid?
Okay.
And early, there's an essay on a documentation on early Baptist creeds. You'll find Maria Creek in full there. And that was 1809.
That was going to fall.
I hope somebody over there is going to watch her.
I'm watching her.
Get away from that.
So you didn't actually go to Kansas City, but you were able to get the stuff electronically.
Yes. Via post. I got the all the microfilms through the post, and I had to go to the customs office, which is a long way from where I live, and tell them that what was in it and how much I could sell them for, and I had a terrible time there because they wanted to see money. And the funny thing was, I'd sent my doctor's thesis, which I never had bound, to America to be bound because it was a third the price of in Germany. And I thought, the postage isn't that much, and so I'll save. And around about the same time, my doctor's thesis came back, and I had to go to the customs officer, and I had to pay added value tax on that because they said now I could sell my thesis at a greater price because it was bound. And I said, but I'm not going to sell it. That's the only one I have. That's my doctor's thesis. I've written it. It's my it's my property. But they said, the value's gone up though. That's how officials are, aren't they? Now, actually, I didn't have to pay much on those microfilms, but they told me I had to open it, and they got miles away, in case it exploded. Yes, he gave me a penknife so I could open it. And then got back. But I've had to pay customs duties on all sorts of silly things. Last time I was here, I had shirts and shoes and things like that, and so I packed them in a box and sent them per UPS, and they charged me. What did they charge me? $350. That's $175 customs duty on my own old clothes, and they weren't worth that.
You should have got lost in the mail. Huh?
Yes.
Any other questions? That's your bedtime.
Bedtime. Oh, we must get up early too
we
again.
Get up early,
We were